Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting for April 18th, 2017. Lynn, has this been properly posted?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have any citizens that wish to address the committee? Paul?
Is that mic on?
I don't know, is it?
I don't
Can
know.
you hear me?
I think he's got it on, yeah.
All right. Well, I'd like to address the committee on, last month at the school board meeting, concealed carry in our schools was brought up. And as I said, I'm a member of the NRA and I have a concealed carry permit and I do support it. And I want to talk a little bit about what was brought up at that meeting about kids being afraid of guns.
Kids
And
being what?
Afraid of guns, having a fear, an
I don't
inherent.
think it's on.
An inherent fear of guns, seeing all these guns in the school would cause them fear. But the point of concealed carry is that you never see when I carry. Is that? Oh, okay.
Oh,
So the point of concealed carry is that you never see that I carry. And that kids have an inherent fear of guns is just, I think it's a fallacy because kids are not afraid of cops. I do not see kids being afraid of police officers, and since police officers carry firearms with them, if they were afraid of the guns inherently, they would be afraid of the police officers. But rather, people project their fears onto their kids. I know my fears changed a lot once my daughter was born. As a young man, I didn't fear much. But kids are more afraid of being picked last, just the teasing and those type of things. These are the things that kids fear. Their fears are much different than mine. I fear heroin. I really have a scares me to death with my daughter growing up, and that if she tries that once, her life will definitely change. I fear drunk drivers. I get on the road and there's times of years I won't drive, and one of them's Halloween, and New Year's Eve, Super Bowls. Those times I won't drive because I fear being on the road. So fears are legitimate to have, but we have to put them in perspective of am I just afraid of an inanimate object for the object's sake? People, I take that risk of driving all the time. I walk through the parking lots and I look at people's tires sometimes to see how bald they are, and I know that people don't take care of their cars, and yet I am willing to drive. And I drive past someone at 55 miles an hour head on, and so I confront that fear all the time, that someone in the opposite lane, and I put faith that they're being responsible. Now, as a gun owner, I don't fear guns. I do fear bad people with guns, though. That's why I carry. So there is a fear there just of bad people. And people being, that evil has existed since Cain killed Abel. Abel turned his back on his brother in trust and was slain for that. So I have a fear of bad people with guns. I do not have a fear of good people with guns. I know it's a touchy subject for some people, but I've been around them all my life. My daughter's 9 years old. She got her first gun this Christmas, at 22 for Christmas. She has no fear of that. So
30
it's not
seconds.
An inherent fear. It's something that some people would project on it. And she'll learn how to be a responsible gun owner, safety. One thing, maybe tomorrow night, if I have a chance, I'll talk a little bit about safety, because safety comes with familiarity. And actually, concealed carry has helped in safety with guns a lot more than people realize, just because you become more familiar with your firearm. Anyways, thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Okay, and seeing there's anybody else that wishes to address us? Thank you. We'll move on then into our rest of our committee meeting. Committee members, you saw a list of about 10 different policies in front of you when you got this, and you probably got into a panic attack about what this was all about. Our objective here is to review these. These are some of those we get semi-annually from Neola that have modifications, maybe because of laws or compliance or something like that. So that's what we're dealing with here. And our objective is to go through these and determine whether we can bring these to the board tomorrow evening for the first reading. And Joel, you want to kind of... By golly, item 1 is not, yeah, I'm looking at those all as policies. I'm sorry, thanks, Joel. We do have minutes from our last committee meeting in front of us. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Barbara, seconded by Greg. Were there any questions, excuse me, were there any questions in the minutes from last month? Changes? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Opposed? 5-0. Okay, thanks, Joe. Would you kind of maybe give a synopsis of what this is all about? Because we talked about it a couple months ago, but maybe a review
Sure.
and how this works.
Yeah, so as we, transitioned, reviewed our policies, made some updates to what our policy manual is, part of going into contracting with Neola was to get policy suggestions that our committee and then our board can consider. What you have in front of you is 9 policies that need some attention at this point. I'll share with you that there's probably another 25 more policies that require a little bit of attention. They may need attention, they may not. If you look at this first document or this first informational piece, this gives you a little bit of a rationale as to why a change is being made. This comes to us from Neola. And so if we go down the list, and I think we have to entertain each item individually, but you'll see, for instance, revisions to policy 0100, the definitions. If you look at this packet here, the explanation for why that change would be recommended is right here for us to look at as a committee and entertain if we want to make that adjustment. If you go through that list, and we'll get to it item by item, not to go out of order, but you'll see a couple of new policies. When we talked about going into Neola, one of the benefits was we were going to be given policies that that need to be in place to address changes in the law. And so you'll see a policy, for instance, the required student academic standards, the children and youth in foster care. Those two policies are there because of changes in law that require us to have a board policy on those areas. So as we go item by item through this, we can get into a little bit of an explanation, but understand that this informational packet here has a lot of the rationale as to why a policy change or a new policy is being recommended to the committee.
The other thing I think we should mention, and Joe and I sat down a week or so about this, over this, we might get one from Neola in here that we determine we don't need, or that we have at least one that we think we're ahead of what they're talking about. So those we won't necessarily be dealing with unless you see something that.
And again, it comes down, it's not just Neola's recommendation, it's very similar to how we did business before. The administration is making a recommendation to the committee makes a recommendation to the whole board looks at it, reviews it, sends it back to committee, and then we go back to what our process is. These policies that you have in front of you happen to fall in my department. And so in reviewing them with my team, I looked at what, for instance, the academic standards, the educational options, the homeless students. I looked at what those policies were with the groups that I work with, and then we're bringing those recommendations to you, similar to how we would in the past. I have a meeting with Chris Hedstrom for HR stuff. I have a meeting with Darren Clark for finance and business stuff. And those policy series too will be brought to you for consideration if it's a policy that we recommend as administrators that we adopt in our school system.
Barbara?
Some of the policies, I think they probably were written by Neola, are not as easy to read as some of the policies, of all the policies we used to have in the policy book. And I hope that, if we put this out as permanent policy, that all people in our community will be able to read and understand. Some of this was a little harder to read when I think of, different populations of people in our community.
And I guess I can't speak to specific policy. I do know that a lot of our old policy was very verbose and had
Yes.
a lot of legalese in it.
Yes.
So I don't think that that's changed much with what is there in Neola. Perhaps the individual policies that we're talking about tonight might have that, but similarly speaking, when we did the drafting of the policies, a lot of what was policy in Waukesha is still policy
Yes,
in Waukesha with minor modifications to it. So the language is still the same. What you see here in your packet tonight,
Well,
if we want to get into an individual
Yeah.
policy, I can explain then how
let's
these
do it
items
that
were
way.
built.
Here's my suggestion. We have 9 of them to ultimately approve and determine whether we're going to take them to the board tomorrow evening. And I think what we ought to try to do is just go through these quickly and see, what are the changes, because many of them are just a sentence or two. Go through those and possibly just take a vote on the whole packet. Now, if there's one we want to exclude from a common vote, we can do that. General vote.
Rather than one
We
by
don't have to
one.
vote, we don't have to vote 9 times, is what I'm saying. We might vote one time for all 9 of them, or we might vote one time for 8 and leave one of them out because of some issue. But let's take them one at a time briefly, because again, this is a synopsis of why the rationale is, what the rationale is for changing something or bringing it in.
Mr.
And then
Bonner, I don't have a copy of that. Yeah, I don't have that copy.
No, you do.
No, I do. Great. Do you have? I don't.
in the packet,
Thank you. Yeah. Did not have
So
this.
let's, and then these are the specific policies that we are talking about with something highlighted. So let's go through these, okay, Joe? The first one is quite simply definitions.
So if you look at the executive summary, the cover sheet to this, you'll see the background statement. And what we did was we took the background statement from the Neola recommendations and we put it right on the policy summary. So the rationale for doing this, some definitions are revised to eliminate either outdated concepts or statements or broad application that are not uniform throughout the policy book. In addition, other technical corrections have been made as noted. And so when you go to what is the actual first page of the policy, you'll see anything that is underlined is the recommended addition
Right.
to policy. If you see something that has the strike-through, that is being recommended to be taken out. So for instance, agreement, it used to mean a collectively negotiated contract with a recognized bargaining unit. Post-Act 10, that's not applicable anymore. If you look under apps and web service, that was updated to address what is the current educational and district environment, so that language is new. When you look on the next page, which would be the back of that, page 204 in your packet, information resource, new information, and so on. So that's what's being added, and this, again, is just based off of an update to how the book is laid out, but also how we're doing business. Again, there's some things that needed to come out, like agreement that talked about collective bargaining, that needed to come out of the policy book because it's no longer applicable.
Okay, did anybody have any issues with change, Joe?
Not an issue, but I'm glad that we're adding these into our definitions. They may seem similar, but there are definitely variations between information resources and apps, and we sometimes just lump the terms together and think that they're all the same, but technology resources, personal communication devices, information resources, what do we mean by each of those, and apps and web services? I think this is a great clarification. I also agree with the strike up above on the first page, so that,
I do have one thing that I'd like to direct the committee to. It says whenever the following items are used in these, it's got underlined, and then you could check bylaws and policies, or you can check bylaws, policies, and administrative guidelines. We will be using these terms to guide us in our administrative guidelines. And so the administrative recommendation, I wanted to leave it blank before we came to committee, would be to check that second box, bylaws, policies, and administrative guidelines. But I wanted to run that by committee first.
Okay, so these would be options for you to mark off.
Pick one or the other.
Now, ultimately, it would end up in just one of them.
Correct.
when
It
it's-
will
when
either
it's
be
actually
bylaws and
typed.
policies, or it will be bylaws, policies, and administrative
And
guidelines.
which one were you picking for this
My
one?
recommendation would be bylaws, policies, and administrative guidelines, because
Yeah.
we're
Absolutely.
using similar language.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we'll make sure that's noted.
That's a good point, thank you. I didn't really understand what
should
you're
be
doing.
consistent through all three, yeah.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're gonna get confused as we're reading.
Right.
We don't want confusion.
Okay.
Question?
Yes?
Speaking of administrative guidelines, will the administrative policy group still be in force? You know, the administrative policy people that get together and talk about these things before we get it?
That, yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Since I've been in Waukesha, the policies have been presented departmentally to the
Okay.
board. So if technology has a recommendation,
Yes.
HR,
Okay.
so those groups will look at and entertain what policy recommendations are coming. My job is to facilitate that when I get this information from Neola.
I thought there was an administrative guideline committee made up of administrators.
There is a guideline committee
Okay.
that is working on the development of our guidelines.
Okay,
But
that's what
when
I'm
we put this
referring to.
together, we incorporated what were board policies and board policy guidelines into our board policies now. The rest, those administrative guidelines, those operational pieces are Todd's rules.
Right.
And so we're working with the superintendent on the final approval of our guidelines
Okay.
for these policies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else on the definitions policy 0100? It's all related to technology with the exception of that piece we struck. And there's also just a strike, go on page 2 of 4 under parent. It's just a rewording of it though, really.
Correct.
Okay. Let's move to, lost my page. The new policy required student academic standards agenda. As an agenda item, that is something new. Required now. Joe, you want to run through that 0151.2?
As part of last year's educational changes in Wisconsin, statute 11830, the school district on each board agenda items is to have by the July meeting, a standalone item on there that talks about the student academic standards. And we talked about this this past year in the Teaching and Learning Committee, and then those standards were reported out to the board.
Right.
We did some of the work during the 15-16 school year on those standards. This year, based off of what the state statute says, we have to have an agenda item on our board meeting. It could still go through the Teaching and Learning Committee, but it does need to be addressed formally on the board agenda.
This is the whole,
This
That's
is
it.
the two-line policy, yep.
Barbara?
Yes, Joe, will the lines be numbered like they used to be? Because it was so easy to refer to questions that we had, you know, in our,
Lynn?
At this time, this is a new software system
Oh,
through
okay.
a company called Board Docs. It's not
Okay.
available at this time,
Okay.
but I am working with them on something that will make the lengthier policies easier to identify
Sure,
what
sure.
line we're talking about.
that's
So-
right. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
But again, as we go through this, we'll be able to identify by underline, strike through, and bold print what the suggested changes are to you. So it might not be as convenient as, say, line 40 on page 2, but we'll still be able to get ourselves to that.
Sure.
Okay, for 0152.2. And that is a new addition. Educational options is 2370.
Yes, again, this is another legal update that comes to us, a recommendation. The policy is revised to reflect the statutory language regarding the annual notice of educational options, which also maybe include notice regarding each school and district accountability report. This revision should be adopted to have accurate policies. So if you look at the policy in bold and underlined, you see the recommended changes. And this is to reflect the statutory updates that were made during the last educational updates in Wisconsin.
That's the bolded part.
Yeah, the legal references are on the bottom of the page, so this would be statute 115-385, 118.15, 188.55, and 118.57.
Strictly a compliance issue.
This is a compliance issue.
Joe?
This has nothing to do with policy, but implementation of policy. How are we going to distribute this information to our parents every year.
Website. It's
Okay,
located on
that's
the
the
district
primary.
website. Yep.
Is that going to be the only way we'll distribute it?
That is a common way that school districts are distributing it. They're making it available on their website.
And I think that is the best way.
Yep.
I just didn't know if there were other ways that we would
Correct.
have made available.
And that's apparently okayed by the state.
It is okay by the state.
Barbara?
But what about people that don't have computers? I always think about those people, and there are parents that don't have computers.
It's available on the website.
And how do they access it? Library?
Library?
Public library,
Friends?
any friend's house,
All right.
family house,
Okay,
if we were to stop into the Apple store, the cell phone store, those would be all ways to access this.
Yeah, I think as smartphones continue to gain in popularity, almost all of them have data packages now, and we're starting to see even in our industry, and I'm in that industry. I mean, 4 years ago, we started to have to, develop websites that essentially were responsive to whatever device.
Wow.
So it could be displayed on virtually anything. So it's very common now. So if they have a cell phone, most likely they have access.
That's not to be dismissive, but it is the most
For
common way
smartphone.
to
it is.
access.
It is.
Greg?
The school report card, if you can picture that, and you can picture the language change, but it's the red, orange, yellow, light blue, light green, and, yeah, those categories would be, so what a district would do would link the school performance reports to their website, make it accessible, those reports, and that's where families could access that information. Those will be listed, but the availability of the report is going to be subject to what the state puts out, yes.
So that's something new then?
This is a new requirement going into next school year. We have had to list partnering sites, but this takes it a step deeper.
Yeah, a step further. Okay. All right, let's move to 5111.01, homeless.
Homeless students. This policy, the ESSA, was reauthorized, and it's required some changes for the 17-18 school year. This replaces, so we adopted a policy on homeless students. This is a replacement, so you'll notice that up on top, given the volume of changes that were required, they were substantial. So we are adopting a new homeless students policy. You can see towards the back of the packet, we do have the current policy on there. The new policy, the policy recommended to you is more robust, and it is up to date with McKinney-Vento and the ESSA.
So these would be meeting now federal regulations,
Correct. This is a federal law, federal statute that we must follow.
okay?
Question?
And it's about twice as thick as it was. Barbara?
Yes. That's okay. In the very, very first sentence under definitions, it says that the homeless students will be provided a free and appropriate public education in the same manner as all other students of the district. But our district, has fees imposed upon our students in every school at every level. So are these students then, they don't have to pay those fees?
These for homeless students fall into the waived category,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And that's part of the McKinney-Vento Act.
Okay, thank you.
Included with that is going to your school of origin.
Yes,
So
yes.
if we have a student living in Waukesha who's homeless but wants to go back to their school in Milwaukee, part of that is the transportation. All of this is federal requirement.
And we had that this year, did we not?
Oh, yes, yes, we do.
This is much thicker, as I said. Added a number of categories, but it's, again, federal compliance.
Correct.
Anything else? Joe?
Just a minor tweak on the first page. Item F, about the middle of the sentence, substandard housing. Just need to remove the number
There's
one
just a
there. Yeah,
glitch
just a
there,
little
yeah.
typo there. Joe, would you mind going through, there were a number of categories, yes.
If I may. There is a note on the back that defines that, so that's actually a footnoted.
Oh, it is a footnote. Oh, okay.
Footnoted number.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I guess it needs to be superscripted then, if we could, have that happen, then we know.
that is the footnote.
Gotcha. So what is, let's see.
Substandard housing.
Okay. Would you mind, Joe, going through, I mean, there's some substantial ads here. Would you mind going through, maybe at a high level, each of the categories, definition of school stability and kind of put this in perspective as to what is the federal government trying to do with each of these categories?
School stability, from an educator's perspective, transiency has a negative impact on student achievement.
Right.
So going from school to school to school. So the idea of school stability is, if you start the school year out at one school, and you become homeless and you have to move, it's in the student's best interest to maintain them at that school, unless there are unusual circumstances where you would say, no, this is not. If you move an hour away, it's not necessarily in the best interest of the student
Right.
to travel an hour to and an hour from school. And you can have a discussion around that. But the idea of school stability is to keep the student in their school of origin. That's the big piece. Immediate enrollment, to the greatest extent possible. Don't delay when you're getting a student in. If a family comes to you and they're homeless, don't use records, don't use other methods of saying, well, we'll start you in a week, or we'll start you when your records come. It's get the student started in school as soon as practical. Transportation, again, we talked a little bit about that, but maintaining transportation for a homeless student to their school of origin for the school year in which they start. And there's a little tweak in there in the old McKinney-Vento. Once they established permanent residence in a place, then that's when transportation would cease. Now that transportation continues until the end of the school year. Dispute resolution, again, in all policy linked, I shouldn't say all, most policy linked to federal rule, there's got to be a dispute resolution process. This policy includes that. Homeless children in preschool, the policy does talk about our students, who are in school prior to compulsory attendance, so our 3, 4, 5-year-old students. Public notice, we do have to notice this publicly. And then our homeless liaison and the requirement that they maintain accurate student records. And then it does list the FERPA, the Federal Family Educational Rights Protection Act, which protect a student's records in school. So that's kind of the broad gist of what's in this policy. And then it gets a little detailed on how to maintain it in the school year.
So as we're considering these changes in policy, are we going to have to make changes in our practices also, or are we pretty much doing this anyways already?
The change, I'd say the biggest change in this, it's twofold, and we're going to address it in another policy. It takes the foster care piece out of homeless, and it puts it in a separate category.
Good.
And then the addition of the year-long transportation, that is a new piece. Again, as I mentioned earlier, transportation used to cease once you establish permanent housing. Now that continues on for the student throughout the school year. Again, going back to, and I want to use their term, school stability, the idea of maintaining the child in their school from the beginning of the year, maintaining that continuity of education, that's important, and that's why there was a change in the law.
And at the end of that school year then?
It'll end at the end of that school year, correct?
Okay. I actually think these are not always saying that I like additional federal regulations, but I'm actually liking a number of
Some of
these.
this was in the previous one, but it's been
Right, more,
really nicely put together.
It spells it out a little bit better.
That's one of our bigger changes, yeah. Barbara?
Question under transportation, Joe. Does the district decide on the form of transportation?
We can control that. We are a little bit limited, being in Waukesha County.
Yep.
We do some contracted carriers to go back and forth, for instance, between Waukesha and Milwaukee, and we're continuing to explore some other avenues for that, but that is an area of,
Sure.
you know, where we're limited here. Milwaukee has more options than we do, but
Right, right. Thank you.
Okay. That's the homeless, 511101, and now we're gonna have a new policy that fits in a part of that. That's 511103, children and youth foster care.
And again, this policy is in line with the Every Student Succeeds Act, the new ESSA, which formerly was No Child Left Behind, or the ESEA, I think, at one time. And this talks about the children and youth in foster care. So it gets very detailed.
Yes, it does.
But this was written in response to, you know, really the needs of many youth in the country. And I would also echo that this applies to many students that we have in the school district of Waukesha.
See, this is following a format of the previous one, and it really includes some of the same things in terms of transportation, dispute resolution, stability is on here, yeah.
Yep.
So,
And because it is a new requirement specific to foster care, it does require us to have a local point of contact. So our homeless liaison is going to also be our foster care contact, because a lot of the services are similar. We have had meetings with Waukesha County as to how to make sure that these services are addressed between the county and the school districts in Waukesha. And so we have been acting on this. It's just, we need to have a policy to address it.
Joe?
Just a quick question, roughly how many homeless and how many foster students are in our district, roughly?
Last school year, we had approximately 240 homeless students, and the number of foster was not taken out of
Broken out,
that.
sure.
When I met with Waukesha County this past year, I would say it was maybe in January we had our meeting, there were 125 students in foster care in Waukesha County, with the bulk of those kids being in the city of Waukesha.
Wow.
Okay. Thank you.
World.
Yeah, it's been increasing over the years.
Yes, it
It has
has.
been going up.
Okay, this would be another compliance matter,
Compliance
quite
policy, yes.
simply, yeah. Okay, emergency medical authorization 5341.
And again, this is just to clean up a little bit between the administrative guideline, which is in development, which will be, we need to link what it is we're doing in policy and what it is we're doing. We have administrative guidelines from our old policies that have continued to direct us as we develop it. This provides some clarity there. What I can say, the emergency medical authorization, there are situations where the school district needs to release records in emergency types of situations, and this policy does help us address that.
How would we do that? Excuse me.
Go ahead, Barbara.
How would we do that?
How would we release a record?
Well, how would we know?
Student has a condition. We have all of those records. If they're reported to us, those
If
records
they're
are on.
reported, that's right.
And we can't know what we don't know.
That's right.
The one that's very clear about this, and it's something that our school staff needs to be reminded of constantly, is we're not to abide by any DNRs, any do not resuscitate orders. And sometimes for health staff, CPR trained staff, medical staff, you know, they hear do not resuscitate and they hear about what their medical experience was. But in a school, we have to continue with those life-saving measures
do.
until 911 is called, until an ambulance arrives, and then
Professional
it's their
medical help,
responsibility
yeah.
to take that over. So this does
That's
address
the
that.
bottom, yeah.
That's on here.
And this does talk about what we would do with field trips, athletic trips, so on and so forth.
Barbara?
Do we, when the ambulance emergency people arrive, do we tell them it was a do not resuscitate if we know?
It's their responsibility. We do not maintain a DNR on record for students. It's not our,
Okay.
we may have that information, but
Okay.
it's up to It's up to the ambulance to
Okay,
have that.
yeah.
They need to act on that.
Well, they wouldn't know either. They would just,
It's their responsibility
To
to
save
find that
lives.
out. Yes.
Okay, anything else on emergency medical authorization 5341? All right. Alcohol drug prevention 5530.
So if we look at the policy, there is some language that is struck at the bottom. Professional staff members are not liable for referring a student to law enforcement or removing a student from school premises. That is the language that is coming out, and again, that is an update to our policy based off of what the what the federal requirement and the state requirements are.
So really,
And it does take the implementation of this and it puts it in the administrative guidelines so that, because when you think about policy, the policy that we have on record applies to many school systems. The administrative guidelines in Waukesha, we've got administrators and staff in place that may be in place or may not be in place elsewhere. And so we want to be able to talk about the implementation of these things in a little bit more fluid manner instead of what would be a policy manner.
this sentence says was deleted.
Yes, it was struck.
Says professional staff members are not liable. That means they now become liable?
No, we moved
That's how I
we
was
moved
reading
the, we moved the referring piece into administrative guidelines. So for instance, we have social workers that are trained in AODA issues in the school district. They might be better apt to do an assessment of where a student is at. We've got 4 SROs working in the system now. How would the SRO be accessed to intervene in a situation like this? So we've got steps in place that we need to be able to fluidly spell that out in guidelines and not have it written in policy, because that may change based off of our staffing matrix, if that makes sense.
Go ahead.
So let's just take an example. I don't think this is very realistic, but let's say we remove SROs. We could easily adapt it in an administrative guideline as opposed to,
Coming back to policy committee
Yeah,
to talk
yeah.
about how the policy should be implemented.
so
When,
that's what you're saying, changing of staff then, how that might change at each
Correct.
individual schools, and just gives you the flexibility as administration to be able to adapt to those scenarios
at the
more
secondary level,
quickly.
I'm sorry, at the secondary level, at a high school, it might mean a phone call down the hallway by an administrator or by a supervising teacher to access it. And that could be spelled out in a guideline. Whereas at an elementary school where you don't have an SRO stationed in the building, your principal is going to be the one, or your teacher in charge is going to be the one who's reaching out to human services or to law enforcement for that. We want to be
There's
able
a
to
better
spell-
example than the one I gave.
Yeah, I just want to be able to spell out more accurately to meet our system needs in a guideline.
See, what's troubling me, before this is struck from this document, it said professional staff members are not liable for referring a student. They're not, basically.
Teachers would not be making the referral. There would be specific staff members. Your math teacher would not make
But
a
I'm reading the
referral.
word liable different than you are, I think.
This is,
We're liable, so they couldn't be sued.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now you're
that's a
saying,
different-
we're taking that away, they could be sued,
we're writing it into administrative guidelines.
because you're transferring it over to the guidelines.
As to who is responsible
Okay,
for
so there's
making
where
the
you got it
referral.
covered.
Yes.
Do we have to make a reference, 5530, that it would be mentioned in the guidelines?
Superintendent shall develop guidelines for the
Okay, there, it's
implementation.
right there, that paragraph, yep. Okay, I'm cool.
Yeah,
Or at least I'm familiar with what you're talking
Because
about.
there was some there was some,
How the word liable was
That's
being
what was
used.
troubling me.
Yeah, yes.
the policy as it was written, it almost conflicts with itself. The superintendent shall develop guidelines for the implementation, which shall include but are not limited to disciplinary codes, parent conferencing, administrative consequences, roles of teachers and administrators, in-service to staff and students. So it tells the superintendent to do these things. And then it says professional staff members are not liable. So it really, just to make it clear,
Okay,
superintendent will develop the guidelines for implementation.
yeah, okay. thank you.
Which we do, and which we do have policy and policy guidelines that talk about consequences for drugs and alcohol and such, so
Yeah.
that's included elsewhere in the policy manual.
Greg?
So Joe, through that, it's not telling staff to look the other way. I mean, so that the average person wouldn't think that. I mean,
Correct.
it's called out in the guidelines.
The guidelines would spell out, yeah, the role of the teacher, the role of the social worker, the role
spelled
of
out.
the principal,
Perfect.
yes.
Good question.
Could sound like that.
The role of the hall aide, the role of, so we can get very specific in the guidelines.
Okay, good, thank you. That was a little bit hairier than I expected. Anything else on that one? Okey-doke, 5530, 5780, student and parent rights.
Student and parent rights, if you.
Lot on the very back page. I made a
Yes, the
note to
back
myself.
page. So if you look to the underlined part, a student is still considered a dependent for federal tax purposes, but who has reached the age of majority may, by written request, restrict his or her parents' access to personally identifiable information from his or her student record. When a student with a disability reaches the age of 18, with the exception of a student with a disability who has been found incompetent, then again, the rights at the 18th year transfer to the student from the parent. And this keeps us in compliance with FERPA.
We've been practicing that, right? It just, I think that's been we've been,
I thought so too.
I thought that we've been following this for a lot of years.
We have been, but we haven't been explicit in policy to this,
Oh,
to this requirement. So,
Documenting it.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
on that one? And student records, 8330.
You look into the middle of the first policy page, beginning with the board may enter into a memorandum of understanding with a county department. Again, this is to address situations where students are receiving county services, specific county services. So this would allow us to enter into an agreement with Waukesha County to exchange student records. Some of that's like truancy, for example, would be a situation where that could apply. And then if you look on the second page of policy, beginning with letter B, forward student records, this gets to a little bit of the detail that the Board of Ed is giving the administrator's authority to do. So B and C talks about what the administrators may do and for what reasons we may do that.
Now, this pretty much addresses records going out
Correct.
from our district. Do we ever have to get records from other governmental agencies coming in, and do they have to follow similar kinds
We
of
have
state and
records.
federal?
Yes, we have
Laws?
records retention, and actually Lynn has gone to all of our schools this year and done some professional development with our administrators and with our office staff on what records get kept where. And so there are mandatory records that come to us from the court, from the county, and sometimes we'll get, not necessarily records that are coming from a governmental agency, but we'll get families that'll provide us with a private evaluation of a student. And those records are kept following a protocol in the district, separate from a cumulative record, but they're maintained by us.
Okay, so I guess when we talk about student records, are those records under the umbrella of student records or not? The ones coming in,
There
like
are,
from the courts, or not? Or are they they're truly separate, and we call them outside records, or we call them something else?
we have a cumulative record that we maintain on students, which is their academic record. We have a student record, student services record, a special education type, that talks about the additional services that a student might get. And then we have a behavior file that we would maintain on a student. And all of that is spelled out in three separate, it's very detailed, it's in three separate filing cabinets.
So where do the court records fall in then?
It could fall into the behavior record, it could also fall into the student services record, it just depends on what type we're getting.
And then, once we have those, we are responsible for maintaining confidentiality
they're-
on those also then.
Maintain confidentiality, and we also destroy those records at spelled out periods of time. And the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction puts out a school district records and retention document. It's public, it's something that anybody can look at, and we maintain those records to that specificity.
Do we need clarification on those records coming into us from courts or from wherever?
We just did that this year. We've provided that to our buildings.
Okay.
This year. Lynn spent the better part of 2
Through
months.
administrative guidelines.
Through administrative guidelines, we would write out how that is being done in Waukesha, but that has been done
Okay.
this past year.
Okay. Yeah, because whenever we've been talking,
It
at
is
least
huge.
at this level for the board, I've always been thinking the student records are ones that we generate. And I never really gave it any thought that, well, we might be receiving records from other governmental agencies or maybe from a private psychologist or, you know.
Previous schools.
Yeah, right.
Previous schools, and the exchange of records between schools, you want to make sure that you're sending what you should be sending and some stuff is for our eyes only when it comes into that
Right.
exchange. And if the parents choose to furnish that to the new district, they're able to do so. But yeah, we get a lot of records. There's no doubt. FERPA, HIPAA, the area in between the two, it depends on what is sent to us.
Else on student records?
Just a quick
Yes.
clarification, please.
Amanda?
All three of these different records, the files or cabinets, whatever, these all fall under FERPA?
There's guidance under FERPA for all of
For all of
those.
them, okay,
Yep.
thank you.
That's been a very big task that Lynn has done a lot of work on this past year.
Okay, now, if we were okay with that at this point, we would seek a motion to forward these to the board tomorrow night for their first reading. Clear on that?
All right, Mr. Chairman, I move to provide the Board of Education for a first review, all of the policies included that we discussed this evening.
Very good.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Joel. Any questions on that? We'll be reminding the board when we do this. Again, I'll probably be telling them that a month from now, we have the second reading. We
Yeah.
would like to take this as a group. Otherwise, poor Sue would be doing 81 votes for 9 times 9.
We might want to
I'll bribe her.
just talk through that process with them, so.
Tomorrow night, yeah. And, just a minute. And, then, also, I'm planning on explaining that this is the process we're gonna be working with in the future. Twice a year, we have to do something like this, and we still have some in the tank that we're working on through Chris and through Darren, and I don't know, does Jody have some?
Yeah, Jody didn't have, she had one policy this time around.
I'll try and remember to explain to the other 4 board members. I mean, by now you guys are probably sick of hearing about it, but that's the way it goes.
If I could just add, there was some conversation around what will the policy committee do going forward. I would anticipate seeing 8, 9, 10 items per month as we meet over the course of the school year. We still have not gotten our spring updates from Neola yet, so we're gonna get what was the fall, recommended updates from the fall, and then we'll get going on.
If you guys are afraid of losing your jobs for lack of work, it's not gonna happen. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Joe, these things that we reviewed this evening and that were recommended by yourself, and now we're going to recommend it, were these contained in that first pack that we got, those 4 books? Was it in that? It wasn't.
Well, those, I would say that many of the if you see revision,
Okay,
that policy was in the book.
okay.
And it was those books then were part of our review. If you see new policy, those were not in the book, and those are policies then that we'd be adding to our website.
Okay, so in the future, as we go on, it's probably going to be, the source will be Neola for recommendation of policy review?
It will provide us, administration will be the recommendation for policy
Okay.
review. Neola will be giving us resources that we can look at
Okay.
to stay current with the law.
Okay,
Or the layout of the policy book.
okay.
And if we see something, recommendation for future committee meetings, if we think there's a need for some policy on X, Y, Z, we can turn it back to administration and begin developing a policy. So this
On a
is,
policy on
nothing
lighting
has
the parking
changed from that
lots?
perspective.
We can do that.
Good
I mean,
idea.
any board member, any citizen, you know, can make those recommendations that we take a look at, consistent with how we've operated, and I believe that's written in one of our bylaws. So none of that has changed. We're just getting a much more current source of information to make policy recommendations as administrators to our committee.
So,
I think, we didn't vote yet, did we?
no,
Is this on, is on the vote?
yes,
Huh?
action items.
Yeah, but did you have your hand up? I want to find out if you're
Oh,
asking about something where the vote, this vote we have out. No. So, Amanda,
Just for timeline, to make sure that I'm understanding this, it doesn't seem that any of these recommended revisions or new policies are under any kind of time crunch if we have to do the 3 readings. These wouldn't policy technically until July's meeting or something like that, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so there's,
If I could just interject one thing there, the policy on the academic standards, we would need to approve it in, we'll have an April board meeting, May board meeting. It would need to be in place before the,
board meeting. So-
reflect that agenda change.
oh, if
Also-
we're doing this in a
This isn't
grouping.
3 readings, it's only 2 readings and vote. We vote after the second
Oh,
reading.
okay, see, then I was off, okay.
But, Amanda, you do raise an interesting point. If something were to come to us from Neola that was urgent, Joe would probably get to me right away, and we would do whatever we need to do, and we can waive first reading, the second reading if we need to. We are allowed to expedite if it's necessary, and we would do that. And Joe looked over that whole big stack we got. I might have even been there too, I don't remember. And we said there's really nothing in here that's tomorrow type stuff.
Yeah, in this first series, we didn't see a tremendous sense of urgency. If everything goes according to what is our process, the policies would be approved. My meetings with Darren and Chris would allow us to get things on policy committee agenda in a timely fashion.
Because that is an issue. We have to make sure if it's urgent, like the one in July, I mean, that's not real urgent, but we're gonna make that one. That's the only one I think we had that had a legitimate time frame on it. So,
I think I think the fastest we can do something is 24 hours. We have to post, we have to give a 24-hour notice, and if we actually had something that we had to take care of immediately, we could do a 24-hour notice, and we could actually bring the full board together and not even have it go through a committee, and take a vote, present and take a vote. So that would be the fastest turn,
I would,
if we absolutely had to do that. Now, we've never really
I
done
don't think
that,
we've ever done
but
anything.
technically, I think we can do that.
there's only really one time of the year, if I could just add, it's when the governor and the state legislature go through their budget development process and their rulemaking around education. They can set the timeline they could say by December 1st, you must. And if they pass the budget after our board meeting in November, then we would have to entertain something like that. But it's really the actions of our state legislature that would have an immediate impact. Otherwise, everything else has a little bit longer of a timeline.
Okay. Then we will vote on the motion that Barbara made to accept and move these to the first reading tomorrow night's board meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0, Lynn. Okay, Barbara, now you had a question.
yes, I just wanted, it would appear to me that school districts that have not gone with Neola probably have policies that are outdated.
I wouldn't want to make too broad of a general, I mean, some school districts employ their own legal counsel, and part of that
sure.
responsibility is
Sure.
stay current and generate policy. You know, many school districts have dedicated staff, you know, solely to that policy piece where they're looking at everything that comes out of the WASB and comes out. Really, there's a tremendous efficiency to this, and when you look at if you look at it from a cost perspective, there is an upfront cost to do this, but on an annual basis, it's the same fee for the WASB. So it really is,
Okay.
you know, we get a lot of policy given to us in a very usable template that allows us to compare what we currently have on the books, and then make adjustments as appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we didn't have any information items this evening. Other business would be, excuse me, again, be recommendations for any future committee meeting, recommendations we want to discuss at any future committee meetings that you might have burning in your pocket or head or something. Good, none. Other as needed, nothing? Then this meeting is adjourned, and our next meeting is